Oh, wow.
Saw it twice, so I was like, oh my god.
That was just weird.
I always used to see a light coming up,
Yeah.
like a headlight, but there was nobody there.
Oh, it's just disappeared.
Hello everybody, welcome to Truth Proof. Hope you're all good today on a Thursday, and we've arrived again, and tonight we've got a great guest who's going to educate us and talk to us about Majestic 12, and some people will be very familiar with it, and others, you know, if you, I don't mean new to ufology, but not as versed in the subject will not be, but it's interesting, and Tom's got a lot to share on this subject. Researcher undertaking a study of the history of MJ12 and looking at it from lots of perspectives. And Tom regularly participates on topics connected to this subject. So really looking forward to speaking with him. But before we do that, let's have a quick look who's in this chat. Good God, we're moving up to 150 people already, so that's brilliant. And thanks for support, guys. We've got Ginge, Stargazer Eternal, Mike the Disabled Welshman, Rebecca King, Louise Hardy. Let's have a look. And Zero Dawn, Char 11, Ben 22, Linny's in, Mrs. Linny, Mia Girl, Deb Shortino, Melvin Sutter. Good to see you, Mel. Mark Anderson. Remember that we want questions in capital letters for Tom if you've got anything that you want to ask him, or any sort of views on Majestic 12, because we're going back, I don't know, Tom will tell us, I think we're going back 77 years, which is incredible, really. And is it a reality, or is it something that was fabricated? I think we're going to find out. So without further ado, I'll bring Tom in. Okay. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad to be here.
Hello,
this will
my
be
friend.
a new experience.
No, it's great to have you here, and it's a new experience for me because you'll be educating definitely me as regards the origins and the incentive for MJ12. So where did all of this begin for you?
I started reading UFO books when I was 12 years old. I was reading Donald Kehoe books, and I don't know, I guess it struck my what I call my gullibility factor, and I instantly became a believer. And I didn't really pay that much attention until around 1990, the late 80s. But meanwhile, I'd been reading European history for years, and I became interested in the history of the Soviet Union and of Russia. And I became very intrigued with the Russian secret police during Tsarist times, the Okhrana, and the secret police in the Soviet Union. And I really got interested in espionage and counter-espionage and all that kind of subjects. So in the late 80s, I happened to turn on the TV and I saw this program called UFO Cover-Up Live. And then I was walking by a magazine store and I bought a UFO magazine and read about these rumors of underground bases and MJ12 and all this. So I became more active in the UFO field and I started reading up on it. And when I saw a copy of the MJ12 documents, the two came together in my interest in intelligence and in UFOs. They merged, and something really clicked with me. And I joined MUFON, which at the time was being run out of Seguin, Texas, which is just a few miles from where I live, and it was run by Walt Andrus. And he came to our local meetings in San Antonio. and eventually asked me to serve on the MUFON board, which I did for many years, over 20 years. And I retired from the MUFON board a couple of years ago. So I've been active in the UFO field and cognizant of what's been going on since around 1990. I have been very interested in the subject of MJ12, and I did a lot of research on the internet a few years back, but I was married and we were raising a family, and I really couldn't devote too much time to it. So unfortunately, my wife passed away in 2017, and I was able to retire and devote full time to the subject. So my first impulse was to go to Washington, D.C. to move there so that I could do research at the National Archives and at the Library of Congress, some of which I did. But because of several circumstances, for example, COVID came along and the government shut down. I couldn't get in and do my work. So I decided to move back to San Antonio. And I started writing research papers on several aspects of what I call perspectives on MJ12. And that got me started. Then I thought, and for a while I thought, well, I'll use these research papers that I've written as basis for chapters in the book, which I probably will eventually do. But I decided to just sit down and write this book.
Okay.
And the idea is to have main sections. One is a popular history of the MJ12 controversy. And then the second, part two, is perspectives on MJ12.
Okay, so tell us then, Tom, if you can. Well, I know you can. MJ12, how did the concept originate? Because we know there's a lot of controversy, and a lot of people say that, you know, this is a hoax. There's no reality to it. But you've invested a lot more time than most people looking into this. So how did it start? We're going back over 70 years, are we?
Well, the documents that mention MJ12 didn't appear until the 1980s. They didn't appear public. Okay. Yeah. And the immediate background of that was during the 70s, a couple of strange things happened. Robert Emenegger and his associate, Mr. Sandler, had been pretty much faked out by the Pentagon, which had promised them a film of a UFO landing. And in the late 70s, a researcher by the name of Leonard Stringfield had been collecting stories of recovered UFOs and recovered occupants of the UFOs. And he gave a big presentation in 1978 at the MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio. And then in 1980, Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz came out with the book, The Roswell Incident. And, the idea there being that it was the recovery of an extraterrestrial craft. So this really incited a lot of interest in the UFO community. Meanwhile, Bill Moore, the author of the Roswell Incident, was doing his own private research, and he was promoting his book, and he was recruited by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations on Kirtland Air Force Base, namely by Richard Doty. And the deal supposedly was that Moore was to observe and report back on the effects of certain deception programs that were being run against UFO researchers. And in return, he would receive, quote unquote, inside information or inside documents that would support the contention that the U.S. government had a deep, dark secret about, having these recovered UFOs and bodies and all this. So in that process, documents started showing up. Documents started being conveyed to Bill Moore that mentioned MJ12. The first one was what we call the Aquarius Telex, and the Aquarius Telex arose out of the fact that a person by the name of Paul Benowitz, who lived directly next to Kirtland Air Force Base and had a business there directly next to Kirtland Air Force Base. This Paul Benowitz person was observing what he thought were UFOs over Kirtland Air Force Base, and he had a physics background. He was very technically savvy, and he was picking up electronic signals, radio signals, probably from the base, maybe elsewhere. And he approached the base authorities and told them, he had a meeting with them and said, "Look, you've got UFOs flying over your base, and I'm picking up signals from these aliens." So that was a problem because the National Security Agency was working on Kirtland Air Force Base, and on Kirtland they were running a number of highly classified programs. So the Air Force Office of Special Investigations ran it up the flagpole to Washington, D.C., and headquarters came back with a deception plan against Benowitz. And so that was part of Bill Moore's function, was to check on Benowitz and see how their disinformation was working. And he would report back to AFOSI. Later on, Moore was notified that if he went to a certain location, he could be shown a document, under kind of cloak and dagger circumstances. And he went from one place to another, then another, then another. He ended up according to him, he ended up in a hotel room in New York, and they showed him what he called the Aquarius briefing. I call it the Carter briefing document. And it mentioned in the Carter briefing document.
Thank you.
Okay. And it does mention, it has MJ-12 in there, and it said several controversial things. One thing, it implied that Jesus Christ was, seeded by the aliens here on Earth. So that's another document that mentioned MJ-12. And then in 1984, in December 1984, Moore's research partner, Jamie Chandray, received an envelope on his doorstep, and inside a series of envelopes was a roll of 35 millimeter film in a plastic canister. They had it developed, and inside was what we now know as the MJ-12 documents, those being the Eisenhower briefing document and the Truman-Forrestal memo. Then later, I think it was in 1986, Moore and Chandray received a tip that that a lot of Air Force documents had been declassified, and they went to Suitland, Maryland, went through a bunch of boxes and found what we now call the Cutler Twining memorandum. And that was an instruction to an Air Force general about an MJ-12 meeting. So that's where the original MJ-12 items appeared.
Okay. And who were the alleged members? I keep saying alleged, Tom, because I'm not quite sure, after all your research, whether you think that this document is legit. Obviously, you've put a lot of time and effort into it. And who were the alleged members involved in the MJ-12 document?
Well, there were 13 people mentioned. Roscoe Hillenkoetter was the first CIA director. He was a naval rear admiral. And it was the Eisenhower briefing document is allegedly a briefing prepared by Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who at the time was MJ-1, for this briefing for President Eisenhower. And other names were Vannevar Bush, who was a really top senior research and development leader, James Forrestal, who was Secretary of Defense. Now, this is at the time of Truman, during the Truman administration, that these people served on MJ-12. Nathan Twining was a top general in the Air Force. Hoyt Vandenberg, another top general, became chief of staff of the Air Force. Detlef Brock was a biophysicist. Jerome Hunsaker was an aeronautical engineer. Sidney Sowers was a rear admiral and the secretary of the National Security Council, and he was a Truman confidant. And Gordon Gray was another senior advisor to Truman. Donald Menzel was mentioned. He was a Harvard astronomer. That threw a lot of UFO people for a loop, seeing his name on the list because he was such a big debunker. Robert Montague was an Army general on Sandia Base, where they worked with atomic weapons. Lloyd Berkner was an atmospheric physicist. And then Walter Bedell Smith replaced Secretary Forrestal, who died after either jumping out of a window, and some people think he was pushed out. So Walter Bedell Smith was
a bit of controversy over Forrestal's death, weren't they?
Yeah, but there's no more than circumstantial evidence, that he died from anything rather than attempted suicide.
Did any of these names in the document ever come forward and, in later life and say that they'd actually been a part of it? We froze here, people. Didn't like that question, did it? Can you? I'm not sure if you can hear me, Tom. So, oh yeah, did you get my last question?
The StreamYard just froze up.
It did, yes. Did any of the people that you've mentioned, or any of the 12, ever hint or come forward to say that they'd been involved in this document and that they'd actually participated? And we've done it again. Shall wait a moment.
Froze up again.
It did, Tom. Yeah. Right. We'll go to a question, if that's okay, Tom, and we'll keep. You're okay with questions? Let's just look at this. We've got a question from Outer Limits magazine. Question for Tom. You expressed an interest in interviewing as many MJ-12 people as you could who refused to be interviewed. Who refused to be interviewed, and why do you think they refused? Thank you, Tom.
Well, I do have several problems in my research. The events in the 80s happened 40 years ago, and some of the people are deceased now. There are a couple of people that won't cooperate. One of them is Bill Moore, really the principal researcher during the 1980s and the early 1990s. And by about the year 2000, he had gotten out of the UFO business completely. And my understanding is he absolutely refuses to discuss UFOs. Another person that is not cooperative, and I'm sorry to say this, I mean, I'd much prefer to say something nice about somebody, but the other person is Timothy Cooper, who received, hundreds of pages of alleged MJ-12 documents. So those are two people that I really need to get to that I can't. There are other key people that I believe could have been directly involved in the creation of the MJ-12 documents that Moore and Chandray received, but they are both deceased now.
Thank you, Tom. There's another question from Outer Limits. I'll not bother asking it, Chris, because we've already covered James Forrestal and whether it's conspiratorial, whether how he passed away. So, Tom, what role did the FBI play in investigating Majestic 12 claims?
Yeah. Well, when the documents came out, I think Bill Moore was a little, I have to say he was a little bit naive, because he had been, at least according to him, he had been led to believe that he was going to be getting inside information in return for the work that he was doing and cooperating as an informant to AFOSI. And when they received the MJ12 documents, when they became public, the FBI did conduct an investigation. Now, the Eisenhower briefing document and these other documents, they have top secret. They show top secret on there. And I think that the FBI's inquiry was basically of two parts. One, did MJ12 exist? And no agency would confirm that it existed or would admit that it existed. The second part of it was, had any classified information been released? And I think their conclusions were that no classified information had been released, and that was pretty much the end of it. Yeah. It's a little bit naive when you get a document submitted anonymously to you that has no provenance, no background of where it came from. It comes, completely under anonymous circumstances. It has top secret on it, and it's definitely worth a person's time to find out if it is classified information. But just because it says top secret on it doesn't mean that it is classified. And I think it was a little naive at the time for people to think that they were getting truly classified documents, because if they had, somebody would have gotten in trouble. You just don't release classified documents without getting in trouble.
Into deep trouble.
That was what I think was going on.
So MJ12, if the document is real and it has been produced and put out there, do you think it's been put out there? Is there the potential for it to have been put out there to muddy the waters regarding the subject of UFOs, rather than it being genuine and something that's definitely bona fide and pushing forward the subject, that the UFO subject, the occupants of these unknown objects are real?
Well, there's this thing I call the double principle, and that's what I think the government does sometimes. They're killing more than one bird with a stone. And the submission of the MJ12 papers could have accomplished several things at the same time. One was that it could have disinformed the UFO community and get people chasing after information. One person termed it as a fruitless search for material that doesn't exist. And then another purpose could be that there actually is some correct information in the papers. And it could get across the information that the government had recovered a UFO and bodies, but the way the document was submitted, it provided plausible deniability. In other words, when people really check into it, they find that the document is not authentic. So it's a classic case of what we call disinformation, something that could contain some correct information, but mostly misinformation. A third possibility is the tracking of the information. An intelligence agency in the U.S. may have wanted to see where the information went, particularly if it went over to the Russian side and into the Soviet Union. They may have wanted to see, they may have had a means to track it to see where it ended up, and what department in the Soviet military or intelligence services, or what building, what office, that kind of a thing. So it could serve several purposes.
So what would be the purpose, though, Tom, if the governments of the world, I mean, there's a change in the way that people are viewing UFO stroke UAP at the moment anyway, but what would be the purpose if the governments of the world said that these things don't exist? Why create such a ruse?
Well, there is a theory that the government has a problem because if it is true that they have physical proof, recovered UFOs and recovered aliens and all this, they've got a real problem because, there are a number of reasons why it's a problem. One of the biggest is that they fear what the public's reaction would be, if truth were known, if the truth be known. Another problem is they've been lying to us for 80 years, and that's a hard thing to get around. So with the possibility that there could be an adverse reaction from the public if the truth were just dumped out there, that there's a theory that maybe they're trying to gradually acclimate the public to the idea. And the UFO community is very good at spreading around, these memes, that there are recovered UFOs, there are aliens, you have, you had Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the X-Files and UFO Cover-Up Live and Hangar 18 movie and all that. And by the 90s, I mean, it was really the whole idea of alien visitation was seeping into the public's consciousness. You could, over here, I don't know what it's like in Britain, but in the US, you could go in a clothes store and see racks and racks of aliens on t-shirts. So it was really coming into the public domain. And there is a theory that maybe there's a program to gradually acclimate the public to the idea without officially confirming or releasing any hard data.
It's there, Tom, isn't it? The drip feed of information in. You'll have said it. We've all said it. People in chat, that in children's books, in TV programs, where perhaps that is the way, the drip feed of information. And I'm pretty sick of the word disclosure because it seems to be hot on everybody's lips, but we're not getting it. But maybe we are getting it just subliminally. What do you think?
It's a possibility. I personally am not. I'm not optimistic about big D disclosure.
No,
and for the same reason that, I mean, if you look at the U.S. government's record, I'm not as familiar with Britain. I'm sorry, but if you look at the U.S. government's record, they have no record whatsoever of disclosing anything positive about UFOs. Okay, you can go back to the Roswell report that came out in the newspaper, and the next day they said it was a weather balloon. You can go back to the Robertson panel, which I think set a long-term policy of denial and deception regarding UFOs. We can see that the Air Force got out of the UFO business and had the Condon report come out saying that nothing to see here, and so on and so forth. You get to the Roswell report that was put out by the Air Force in the 1990s. It came out with 2 books. The GAO investigation turned up nothing. And then you look at ARO today, and they've disclosed virtually nothing, and claiming that they found virtually nothing. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on whoever's running ARO right now. I know that Mr. Kirkpatrick, a lot of people don't trust him because he was very skeptical and negative about UFOs. And what I'm trying to say is the track record of the government is completely negative. So I don't know where people get this idea that the government is suddenly going to come out and lay it all out there, for everybody to see.
I'm completely in agreement with you. I just don't think it's going to happen. And all we're getting is goalposts widened and the ball kicked further down the field, or more information just to confuse us even more. I noticed when we first started talking, and you said that you picked a book up and you were sort of hooked to the gullibility factor. I think that were the words that you used. And do you think, and that's not to cast an insult on anybody within the UFO community, good God, I'm sort of as involved as anybody, but do you think there's a lot of gullible people within the subject of ufology as a whole and unexplained phenomena? I'll believe at any cost kind of thing without doing the research.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's been termed the will to believe, and I mean, I want to be honest. I want to believe that the government has recovered UFOs. I want to believe that they've recovered aliens and all of this, but at the same time, to be halfway mature about it, I have to be able to have supporting evidence or confirmation, that such is the case. Now, there's been enough out there to convince me that it's a distinct possibility that it's true. But especially today with the internet and with social media, people can just jump around on Twitter and on the internet and on YouTube and just constantly get UFO porn, things that stimulate their imagination and that confirm their beliefs about the aliens and about disclosure. So that's very easy to do. Now, doing real research, I do the best I can, but it's work, and I enjoy it. It's what I want to do. But it is work, but just flitting around on YouTube and Twitter is not work.
No. And you, am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You were involved with MUFON from 1995, yeah? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's a long time, Tom. So you, even if you weren't involved with the UFO cases as such and deeply involved with those, you must have come away with some feeling that I know you said, I want to believe, but have you never come away with some feeling that there's a reality to this? Because I think for a lot of people, and, I do know that some people see a satellite and they think they've seen some spacecraft from an outer galaxy. But for a lot of people who've had a genuine experience, they don't have to believe, they know. But after all the years that you've invested with MUFON, have you not come away with a sense of, surely you can't spend that many years and not think there's a reality to this?
Oh, I do. If you take really the just extensive and massive number of reports of UFO sightings that are legit, they're not explained by, anything natural. You take that, you take the reports of recovered saucers, recovered UFOs, and then you take the abduction reports, you put all that together, and I think any halfway open-minded person would have to accept that we're dealing with a real phenomenon here.
Yeah.
Now, we may not know much more than that, like where do they come from, what do they want. There are apparently at least several groups that are visiting us and operating here, in the earthly plane and interacting with us. But where they come from and why they're here and, what the agenda is and what they're really about, we may not know that much. But no, I am a UFO person. I personally am convinced that the UFO phenomenon is real.
Yeah.
Now, when I'm doing research, I mean, one of the, and I'm not a trained historian. I am college educated and all that, but when you're doing historical kinds of research, or if you're a journalist and you're conducting an investigation, or you're investigating something, if you're going to put out information that's halfway reliable, you need supporting information. There has to be evidence to support what claims you're making, and that takes work. Like I mentioned, that's work. as opposed to just, people
Skimming
talking
through
about stuff and believing what they want to believe.
Yeah, you make a good point. Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Question here, Tom, from Studio 21. If the 12 were an assembled group, what did they achieve that Blue Book didn't?
Okay. There's something that I think is regularly overlooked about the whole Blue Book question. The Project Blue Book was a trap for the Air Force because the Air Force was compelled to deal with the public, with public reports. And eventually they wriggled out of it, closed it down, and went on their merry way. But actually, there was a joint Army-Navy publication that gave instructions that military affected sightings, in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, those kinds of reports went through a separate reporting channel. So the military has had their own channel of reporting, and what they did with the reports, I don't know. They may have thrown them away. They may have had them filed somewhere. They may be on computer disks or on computer servers. But over the years, the military, at least in some instances, has recorded and probably archived interactions with UFOs. Now, at the same time, there's been the phenomenon that, let's say, an Air Force pilot sees a UFO, he reports it over the radio, he lands, they instruct him to go to the end of the runway, and the so-called men in black show up and escort him to a briefing room, and he's debriefed for 3 days by AFOSI, and they tell him, you didn't see nothing, right? But they still take that information and they have that information as a report for their files. So two things occur: intimidation of the witness, and yet a recording and storage of the information. So that could be something that MJ12 has been this historical military interaction with the UFO phenomenon. Now, if there has been an MJ12 and if there has been one or more recovered saucers, it's only logical that only certain select people would know most of it. Okay, there are very few people that would know everything, that the government has. But it is compartmented. I mean, that's routine in classified projects, that the information is compartmented, and you're only given information that you need to do your job. So that's a basic principle. So
Okay, thank you.
I think that's what MJ12 is about.
And you touched on the MIBs, the Men in Black. And do you think then, Tom, that's exactly, it's almost like folklore and myth that these beings are pale-faced, almost alien-like beings? Do you just think that they're government officials that are put in place to close down members of the public who've seen something very genuine, or military personnel who've seen something genuine? Or do you think in some instances the Men in Black, the alleged Men in Black, are something else?
Well, when I said Men in Black, I meant that metaphorically.
Yeah. I've just thrown it at you anyway. Just what are your views on them?
Yeah. You got guys in blue suits with crew cuts and an earpiece in their ear, and they show up at your front door. And they want to debrief you about you. Then that's what I call them Men in Black. Now, the strange-looking Men in Black that some people have reported, it's not outside the realm of possibility that could have been some kind of an effort from the military. Now, the reason why I say that is the Air Force has had a department of people that have unusual abilities in that they can be actors, they can be mimics. Some of them look strange and act strange, and they're used for very specialized purposes. So it's not, and I'm not saying that it did happen, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that occasionally and very occasionally something like that could be done. And a
Yeah,
person goes, "Oh my God, was that an alien that came to my front door?" You know.
That's interesting, Tom. So basically, they could profile a man, a woman, or a couple, and tailor the person or the individuals that they would send to them as they see how they would react, or give them the kind of adverse reaction that they would want, and they've got people in place to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
It's possible.
It's a fascinating concept, but yeah, not out of the realms of possibility. Mark Anderson's got a question here, Tom. Tom, were there any competing groups in the government at the time? And I'm assuming we're talking at the time of the MJ12 documents.
That's a good question. There are always competing groups in the government. Now, in the case of MJ12, assuming that it or something like it existed, I think it would have been under such a tight lid of secrecy that there wouldn't have been the usual phenomenon of what I call domestic opposition. And domestic opposition, in my view, are these government agencies and bureaucracies fighting over budgets and fighting over turf, fighting over the amount of policies and activities that they can control. So I think in the case of MJ12, if it did exist, there probably wasn't any competition there because it would have had to have been kept so secret.
Thank you. What has the US government officially stated about Majestic 12?
The one document I can point to is the Cutler Twining memo. And the Cutler Twining memo was a document that Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray found in the National Archives. And it was weird because, and I've been to the National Archives, I've gone through a lot of boxes. In the National Archives, they have file boxes, and in those boxes, they have file folders. And that's where the documentation is within file folders. Well, then you go, Moore and Chandray went to this particular box, and the Cutler Twining memo was between file folders. Okay, that's not normal. Okay. And so they pull this thing, and it mentions MJ12. It's an instruction to General Twining that the MJ12 Special Studies Project would be during the regular meeting rather than as a separate meeting. It was an instruction, but it was unsigned. Now, I've held the document in my hands. I've looked at it. It has the type set is blue on it, so it does look like carbon. And what happened was the archival supervisor at the time conducted a search to find out if anybody knew about MJ12. So there's a memorandum in the box attached to the Cutler Twining memo that says what actions were taken to try to verify to see if MJ12 existed. And like I mentioned before, several government agencies and departments were checked, and no one either knew about it or would admit that they knew anything about it. And it's one of those unusual situations where it may be the only situation where you have a document that is in the National Archives, but is attached to a memo that says they don't have any proof that it's authentic.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So let's assume, let's play with idea. It's an elaborate hoax to just just to play some kind of ruse and lead us down wrong path. Who would have created it? Would the government have created it? Because it's ended up in an official government archive. That paper has ended up there. That document. So who would have been responsible for creating that?
Well, the thing is, Paul, creating phony documents is the stock and trade of intelligence agencies. They create phony documents all the time. They create phony passports, phony papers, and in the case now, the Cutler Twining memorandum is an actual physical document that you can pick up and look at. But the Eisenhower briefing document and the Truman Forstall memo were merely photographed, and they were developed from a roll of, Moore and Chandray developed them from a roll of film. So that not only do the documents have no provenance and there's no supporting evidence to prove their authenticity, they're still a step removed by being photographed rather than being supplied as a physical paper.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
And forensic experts will tell you that they cannot verify a document's authenticity without having the original. Okay. So that I don't know if there was anyone in the UFO world at that time that was sophisticated to pull off that kind of a hoax. And my personal opinion is that it was created by
We'll see whether Tom comes back. He will do shortly.
Okay, we got frozen there.
Yeah, you did. So you just got to where your personal opinion, and then we stopped.
Yeah, is that it was created within some intelligence agency in the government. Okay.
Yep.
For whatever reasons. Okay.
So
and I don't want to go further than that because I don't want to spoil the fun and spoil my book and all that. But that'll be in my.
That's fine. Thank you. And we'll go back to Studio 211, part 2 of his question. I can't remember part 1 if I'm being truthful, Andy. Or were the MJ and Blue Book working together, or was BB working for Blue Book working for MJ 12? And I think Tom's froze again. No doubt we shall come back. I hope it's not me that's frozen, it's Tom. Just bear with us, people. Here we go. There we go. And we'll bring Tom back in. Okay, Tom, you okay?
Yeah.
Hello. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you got the question. Sorry about that. We're just having a few technical problems, guys, but we'll just bear with us. Part 2. Were MJ, Majestic 12 and Blue Book working together, or was Blue Book working for MJ 12? This is what Studio 2... I don't think... I'm not sure you'll know that answer, but there you go.
Well, and as I mentioned before, the military had a separate reporting channel for UFOs than the public civilian channel, and there's been an assertion that there was a real Project Blue Book, and that's the military side of it. Now, if you're in the military and you get a report and you sticking it in a file in your file cabinet, and you get a phone call that says forward that file to XYZ, you're in the military, and it's just like working for a company. Your boss tells you to do something, you do it if you want to work there. Okay, so was Blue Book working for MJ12? I don't know that they knew about MJ12, but if they're instructed to forward certain information on, under a compartmented basis, I'm sure they did that. The problem is there's no way we can verify it, unless unless if any records exist that they would be released, which I don't think would happen.
Thank you. Do you I'm probably going over a bit of old ground here, but do you think then that documents like MJ12 have hindered the public's acceptance of the UFO phenomena because there's that many controversial issues with such documents? Do you think it just further clouds the waters?
Well, the more conservative UFO researchers don't want to have anything to do with the MJ12 controversy, because as far as they're concerned, if the documents are phony, it's an open and shut case. And their attitude is, well, we're trying to get to the bottom of the UFO mystery, and if we're dealing with phony information, that's not helping us get to where we want to go. So we're going to throw that aside and let's go on and do, research on things that will help us get closer to the answers to the mystery. Now, my point of view is different because I'm interested in the intelligence world. I'm fascinated by espionage, counterespionage, intelligence, counterintelligence, psychological warfare, deception, strategic deception, tactical deception. I'm interested in all those things. And even if the MJ12 documents are not authentic, which it's obviously true that they're not, it still fits within my own personal paradigm of interests.
Mm. So what else then? You're interested in the intelligence world regarding the unexplained. What else have you uncovered? Have you uncovered anything like accidentally and thought, good God, this has had implications to the subject of UFOs?
Yeah, one thing I think that people don't seem to want to think about is, now it's an article of faith in the UFO community that the aliens, the UFOs, the extraterrestrials, whatever they are interested in our nuclear weapons, in our nuclear sites. That has been demonstrated. There are good studies that there's at least one good study that's been published by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies about that, and there's plenty of supporting evidence for it. But the flip side of that is, what about nuclear war? Could the U.S. and/or the Soviet Union be using UFOs or the threat of UFOs as a deception in the event of nuclear war? Things like decoys, okay? Things like false radar returns, this kind of thing. We're talking deception. Now, nuclear war, I mean, that's it, okay? That's, you're betting all your chips in nuclear war. So deception becomes, and really anytime you engage in warfare, deception is mandatory if you want to achieve your goals and objectives in war, and especially in nuclear war. Like I said, you're putting all your chips on the table if you get into that. So I think that they have radar jamming, they have false radar returns, they have decoys, and probably a number of ways that we'd never heard of to deceive an adversary.
We've gone again. We'll just see whether Tom comes back. I'm sure we will. In the meantime, thank you, Alison, for doing the moderating tonight. Okay, Tom, you're back there again. Your nuclear war and the ability to deceive.
Yeah. And there are some other things that are interesting. It's not UFOs, but one thing that the Soviets did when the Soviet Union was still around was that they would try to stir up trouble in other countries, and they did this in Western Europe. They would plant materials and communications that would get people to think that there's kind of neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic activity going on, and the Soviets would do stuff like that. And there's legitimate concern by the Jewish community of anti-Semitism, but I think it should be no.
Oh dear. I was just saying, thank you, Alison, for doing the moderating. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Gemma. And we've got close to 200 people in chat. Thank you, everyone.
It should be noted that it's a possibility that not all anti-Semitic activity is genuine. It may be, the product of another country trying to stir up trouble.
So in a way, it's in the interests of the superpowers, the power elites of the world, different countries, to sort of promote the myth of the UFO. Even though I think that, like you've said earlier, you believe there's a reality to this. I do, and a lot of people in chat do. But it's good to promote that, to cause this, to muddy these waters and cause this kind of, I don't know, suspension of disbelief. We don't actually know what's happening, and we could blame it on the aliens, even though probably the other superpowers, the Americans, China, Russia, they know who's behind it. They know what's doing it. But it's good to let the public believe that there's a UFO element, do you think?
Yeah, that's a possibility. I think they have used it, in various cases, not citing cases so much, but in various instances. But in my view, that doesn't indicate that there are no UFOs.
No.
Okay, I think that governments from time to time use it, for their own purposes. Many years ago, the Wall Street Journal came out with a fascinating article about disinformation, and they mentioned a case where the Soviets had planted a false story in, I think, in an Egyptian newspaper, and the story ran like this: American astronaut goes to the moon, walks on the moon, sees the Earth from the moon, hears the call of Allah, and comes back to Earth and converts to Islam. Then after converting to Islam, it has an adverse effect on his career.
Right,
okay.
I see.
Now you can imagine Muslims in the Middle East reading a story like that. They would be infuriated. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it was really a very good example of disinformation in that, yes, astronauts did go to the moon. Yes, they did see the Earth from the moon. Yes, probably in more than one instance, they had a life-changing experience. But no, he didn't convert to Islam, and no, he didn't suffer. His career didn't suffer because he converted to Islam. Okay. And that's really just almost a classic case of disinformation.
Absolutely. We'll just throw this in, and it's one for you personally, really, Tom. Have you ever had your own sighting? Steve Colling is asking.
No, and my joke is, if you don't want to see a UFO, then hang out with me. You probably won't ever see one.
Well, it's clear
I'm a nuts and bolts guy. Okay.
Yeah, but it's clear that your mind's not closed. Your mind's not closed, Tom. You do believe in the reality of these things. And it froze again. I'm sure we'll come back. Look what effect your question had there, Steve.
I mean, if it's an unambiguous experience, I mean, it's unambiguous. Okay. And, you've got things like these satellites that go in a string, and all this, and people report UFOs. And, sometimes you do see unusual things, many of which can be explained. But, if a UFO lands, 500 feet from you, and the aliens come out and all that, then that's it is what it is. But that hasn't happened to me.
Well, I think we can all read from this, Tom, that you're a man who likes to spend time researching and spends time in archives looking for the documents and looking for the information. So you've never had an urge to go to one of these locations where people allegedly see unexplained phenomena?
Well, here's the deal with that. People complain that the UFO, the civilian amateur UFO people don't do scientific work. You don't know where you're going to see a UFO, and you don't know when you're going to see one. Okay, that's just the reality of the situation. Now, there has been, as I mentioned, there has been a demonstrated pattern of UFOs being around, nuclear sites. But even then, you don't know when you're going to see one there or not. So in order to do scientific work, I mean, if you want to study lions, you can go to where lions live and you can study lions. But you can't go. I mean, I think the people are kidding themselves. Now, maybe they are seeing something, maybe they're not. But there's no place you can go and sit down and say, okay, at 8:00 tonight, there's going to be a UFO, and we can have an unambiguous sighting. It just doesn't work that way.
You make a good point, and I agree in part, and I disagree, because I do think there's certain areas around the world, and I don't think that we're delusional where we're doing the research. I agree. We could go to this location for 6 months a year and see nothing. But I think there's a higher probability in some locations to observe, might not know what it is we're observing, but we do know it's not satellites, than other places in the world. And I'm not just trying to be controversial to what you've said just for the sake of it, but I do think there are locations where you have a higher probability to see something of a highly unusual nature than other locations.
No, I agree with you 100%. And a higher probability, certainly. And I don't dispute that. But I originated from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is in Tornado Alley. And I lived there for over 20 years growing up. And you have a much higher probability of seeing a tornado in Tulsa, Oklahoma than you do in London, England. Okay. And living there over 20 years, I never saw a tornado.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can have a higher probability of something, but it's not.
Okay. So, right, let's just jump back to this. We're still on MJ12. I suppose we've got to be, because you're the MJ12 man. Orange, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Is MJ12 still running in a different guise?
Well, over the years, I've probably come up with at least 10 or 20 different alleged names for MJ12. There was one term that was being thrown around during the 1980s or 1990s was COM12. A person by the name of Mr. Cooper was saying it was called Majority 12. Richard Doty, there was a story in UFO magazine about Project Zodiac, that Zodiac was MJ12. That was in a UFO magazine many years ago. And Richard Doty claims that the group is now called Zenith. So, this is all on the rumor level, and none of it's officially confirmed. Now, it's possible that it does exist, but it's under some other cover. Maybe it's in the education department. It's hiding in plain sight. Nobody would look there. That kind of a thing.
Good point. Talking about Rick Doty, because I know you've done a fair bit of work regarding Rick. Do you think Richard or Rick Doty would be allowed to say the things and the information that he's putting out if there was any validity to it? And I'm saying that, I'm just throwing it out there because there'll be a lot of people that don't like what I'm going to say, but I like Rick. I've met Rick and I find him okay. But would he be able to come out with all of the things that he's saying and be able to walk about in safety?
That's a good question, and I've wondered that myself, Paul. Because think about it: why is Richard Doty the only person from AFOSI that is out here saying all this stuff? Do you know anybody else from AFOSI that is doing that? So
absolutely
why?
not. And he has information. He's got so much information, not just queuing up at the back of his teeth to talk about. If you ask him anything, he seems to have a bit of information on it. I've spoke to Rick about some UK cases, and he's tried to help, and my problem is, and if he's listening to this, or if he gets to listen to this, I think he'll take it in context that I'm meaning it. You don't know whether it's legit or not. As much as Rick's a nice guy, I just can't say whether what he's telling me is actually on the level.
Well, most of his claims, especially these stories about alien contact and things, you can't, that supposedly were under his work with AFOSI, you can't verify it. Okay, you just can't verify it.
No.
Now he did, and he's mentioned this publicly before, but he's mentioned that one of the project names associated with the Paul Benowitz affair was called Seven Lambs, LAMBS. And I actually filed a Freedom of Information Act request with a government agency mentioning Seven Lambs, and I asked for confirmation of it and any documentation they could provide. The answer was, we can neither confirm nor deny that Seven Lambs existed or exists. And also the information is properly classified. Okay. So that tells you right there that it exists, and it came from Richard Doty. So everything he's saying is not, BS. I know at least some of it is true.
And I weren't saying that because I actually believe, like you've just said, some of it is true. He couldn't know what he knows. I mean, he allegedly told Linda Moulton Howe that MJ12 story were true years ago. I mean, you'll probably already know this, and he knew of the existence. He could prove the existence of small grey humanoid type aliens. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Well, he claims that when early in his AFOSI career, which only lasted about 7 years, but he was on, he was working on Kirtland Air Force Base, and he claims that he was called into a briefing, and a colonel came down from Washington, and he's never said how many people were in the briefing, but a colonel and an aide gave everybody a packet of information. Excuse me. And this packet was, this information about the truth about the U.S. government's covert work with extraterrestrial visitation, and the film of the Roswell incident, the Roswell craft, and they were shown pictures of different aliens, 4 or 5 of them. He was informed that there were, I think, 5 different alien groups. He said 4 or 5 different alien types. And he is still telling that story today. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess I could file an information request with the government, and I'm not sure how to phrase it. Maybe John Greenwald wouldn't know how to phrase it, but but I think I get exactly the same answer that I got about 7 lambs. I just say either we have no record of it, or we can't find anything on it, or it's properly classified and go away.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got another question.
The
here.
government is
sorry,
not going to, they're not going to provide a smoking gun. They're just not going to.
No.
Unless they're ready to get into the disclosure game. And that's a slippery slope.
As you've previously said, and I'm on the same page as you, it's not going to happen, that is. It's just not going to happen. But okay, let's have a look at this. Tetramania, to Paul and Tom, my theory is disclosure happened many years ago, but the problem is 90% of people are more consumed with the problems of the world that are constantly being pushed down our throats. Where you have a point there. We've a lot more things to concern ourselves with than this. Even if disclosure has been put out there, and it would be the biggest thing out there, just general life and living is hard enough, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't agree.
Okay.
It depends on how you're defining disclosure. I'll give you an example. B-2 bomber. B-2 bomber, when it was being developed, was highly classified, and maybe a lot of these things that went on in the UFO community in the 80s were a direct result of the deception programs that the government was running to protect the security of stealth. Okay. But there did come a time that they rolled out the B-2 bomber in front of the Northrop hangar, and they had a big ceremony with American flags and people making speeches. That's disclosure. Okay. But just because Steven Spielberg did a movie, or some government person said, well, I think there are UFOs, that in my opinion, that's not disclosure. Disclosure is the Secretary of Defense holding a news conference in the Pentagon with photographs and with physical evidence and supporting documentation and making a declaration. Okay, that's disclosure.
Thank you. Just so you touched on films and the movies. How has MJ12 and being portrayed in TV shows and the movies? Then has it figured in any sci-fi type films?
There is one series called Dark Skies that was I think produced and directed by Bryce Zabel. That's about MJ12, and I did order a copy of it. I haven't gone through much of it yet. That's the only one.
I think we've just froze again there, and I don't know whether you can. Well, we'll do that. We'll ask Rod to Yes, I've got it, Rod.
That I know for sure, deals with MJ12.
So Rod's saying, disable video if possible. You must be going off a bit more than I realize, and have just the audio on. You might not want to do that, Tom, and I'm not saying do that, but it might stop the freezing issues, but that's entirely up to you. And we've put that out there. We're still going now anyway. Right then, Tom, what about, have you froze again? I think you have actually, haven't you?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, right. What about Stanton Friedman? What were his role in the work of these, finding out about these documents? Yeah.
Stanton Friedman, when the documents came online, so to speak, he did a tremendous amount of really, really good research. His main thrust was researching the people on the MJ12 list, and he did a terrific job. The problem is he never found any official confirmation that MJ12 existed. And I've talked with him a couple of times. I mean, I sat across the breakfast table from him and looked him in the eye and given my objections about certain things. And he says, well, I know the MJ12 is real. That's his opinion. Maybe he knows something I don't know. But the problem with Stanton Friedman and with the Woods, Ryan and Robert Wood, who's now deceased, but they don't have any official documented confirmation of MJ12, other than documents that have been so-called leaked into the UFO community. You know, Psalm 101 and.
It's not really.
You're
right. It's not really good enough to say, "Well, I know it exists." You want a little bit more proof than, "Well, I know it exists." I suppose if we're talking about documents, and unfortunately, Stanton's passed away now, hasn't he? But yeah, he did some great work. I spoke to him about a project here in the UK called Project Winkle, of all names. And he knew about it. I was absolutely gobsmacked that he did. And we spoke about that for a while. And yeah, an interesting man. So what would the implications of Majestic 12 be if it were proven to be real?
Well, the implication as I see it is that we've been led by the nose for 40 years. And been in total confusion, half the people thinking that MJ12 doesn't exist and half the people thinking that it does. And as a deception operation, it's been more than successful in keeping the UFO community off balance and not really knowing what to believe.
Okay. And you talked about... Tell us about the Air Force the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. What do you know about that, Tom?
Yeah, I wrote a paper on that. I wrote a research paper on it, and it's on my blog site. There's not a whole lot of information out in the public domain about AFOSI. I do have a history of AFOSI in book form. And it was started in the late 40s when they had a problem with a certain general that was acting corruptly, and they decided that they needed to have a separate agency to investigate crimes within the Air Force. And it was started by a gentleman that eventually became the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, became the first head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that man was he was an FBI guy and was recommended by J. Edgar Hoover, and he actually organized and got AFOSI started. AFOSI's main mission is investigating crimes on Air Force bases, anything that affects Air Force property or Air Force personnel that's illegal. Now, Richard Doty claims that they also have a UFO component. Now, I'm pretty sure that, and we can rely on this, that one of AFOSI's functions is to protect classified Air Force programs. And they do that through a number of different means. They may put out misinformation. They may have various deception programs. They develop informants in the area of an Air Force base. They may develop contacts with local media so that they know what information is coming in, and they can put out information that they feel needs to go out. They do have a technical component where if they feel like they need to, they may install hidden cameras or microphones or bug telephone lines, that kind of a thing. And it's kind of a mixed bag, but the simplest way to put it is that they're the FBI of the Air Force. And the thing is, a lot of the people now, they don't realize that, today we see disinformation behind every tree, and everyone is accusing each other of being an agent and all that. That didn't happen until Bill Moore came out and admitted in 1989 that he was working as an informant for AFOSI. And if he hadn't done that, we might still today be in the dark about the whole thing. Now, how much of that they actually do, I don't know. That's up to them. But it wasn't until then that the UFO community really had a bead on that.
Do you think, Tom, that some members of the UFO community, as you've just said, community, are being monitored?
I think so, and there's documented evidence, because in the Robertson panel report, they did state that the UFO group, now this goes all the way back to the 1950s, but they did state that UFO groups should be monitored, and they specifically mentioned APRO, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. And I have, this whole business with Bill Moore and Doty and Benowitz is living proof that AFOSI was messing around with APRO. Now, Bill Moore claimed in his 1989 talk that they were monitoring. There were several people that they were particularly interested in. We know that Linda Howe was deceived, that Paul Benowitz was deceived, and Bill Moore claimed that several prominent UFO people were acting as informants to intelligence. So now the other side of it is these UFO conventions, like MUFON Symposium or whatever, they're public affairs. Anyone can attend. So you could have people from the Defense Intelligence Agency or AFOSI or NSA that aren't there on an official basis, but they could be there because they're personally interested in it, and anybody can attend. So there's that side of it. Now, based on the research that I did, my finding was that certain agencies like the DIA and the CIA and AFOSI, they're not supposed to be messing around with American citizens domestically, but they can and will do that if they feel like there's a national security issue or some kind of illegal activity is going on. For example, if you were selling drugs to a person on the Air Force Base, they could be investigating you. Okay, that kind of a thing. Or if you have somehow come across classified information that you're not supposed to have, then they might be interested in that. Now, why were they running all these deception operations in the 80s? That's one of the things that gets me to get out of bed in the morning and try to find out more. You had all this stealth. You had Star Wars. We were still in the height of the Cold War. The Soviets and the Chinese were taking advantage of our open society, where they could get all of this scientific and technical information open source. They were just siphoning off as much of it as they could. And I think there may have been, and it was mentioned in the CIA paper, that there was some concern that the UFO people might be being used, to gather information, and that may be one reason why they were monitoring the UFO groups. Now, today it's completely different with internet and social media, and I mean, it's completely easy to monitor what's going on now. All you have to do is go on Twitter or Reddit or Discord server or YouTube. You can see what's going on right there. So I think things are much easier now for the intelligence people, and it's much easier to deceive people.
How about you personally then, Tom? Have you ever, not necessarily threatened, but have you ever felt that you've been observed or monitored due to the things that you're looking into?
No, I haven't.
No?
That might be an indication that I'm on the right track, if I had. But no, I haven't. But surely, I have not made my work a secret. I haven't told everything I have in my little bag of tricks that's going to be in my book, because I want to, I don't want to spoil the game. But most everything I'm doing is open source, and I'm open about it. And I go on Twitter Spaces. I go on programs like this. If you go on my blog site, I've got over 60 appearances on there, over the last few years. So, I'm pretty much above board about it. And I just prefer to do it that way.
So obviously you'll not be able to, it's probably just a yes or no answer this, but have you ever been told any information regarding what you're looking into and thought, yeah, this is the proof I need, but been saying, you know, you can't disclose where this has come from? It's a difficult one. Has anybody given you any information?
I've come across information that I think probably provides the answer that I'm looking for as to who created the MJ12 documents.
Okay.
But I don't want to say what that is because I don't want to spoil the book.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
I do have some.
I'm sorry.
So, and it's open, you know, the initial data point is in open source information. And most people aren't studying the MJ12 question like I do. They're looking at anything and everything. I have a defined domain of study. Okay. And there are certain things that, you know, they're interesting, but I don't get into them because it's outside of my wheelhouse, so to speak. So when I get a book by a prominent UFO author or a prominent UFO person, I'm reading through there and I'm comparing in my own mind what information I already know, and is there anything new that's, you know, that's applicable to my field of study. And most people aren't doing that. Now there are people out there, they're smarter than I am and they know more than I do about certain things, but I'm just little old Tom Whitmore plodding along, you know, researching and writing and trying to get this book done. And I may be 90 years old with a beard down to my chest, you know, by the time I finish it.
Do you know, and I'm kind of pushing you again on this because I know you're not going to tell me, but I've got to ask. So you think you know, and you're not going to tell us because you're compiling the book, but does it hint towards the reality of the UFO phenomena? The document, does the document
not necessarily.
Okay,
not necessarily.
That's good enough. And so
now there are
said...
other little snippets. There are other little snippets of things, little hints out there that point toward at least being related to the UFO problem. For example, there's a person by the name of John Andrews, and he was a model designer for a major modeling company in the US. And he had a contact that told him when this contact was, I think, in the military in Turkey, when they had an UFO sighting, that it was routed to MJ12. Okay. That's one thing. There's another instance where Robert Dean, who's deceased now, but he was going around UFO conferences telling the story, and he didn't have any backup information, but he claimed that when he was in the military working for NATO, one night a coworker said, "Come over and take a look at this. You know, this is in the middle of the night in the vault." And they had all this documentation about UFOs and aliens and all this stuff. That's another possibility. Another one is a certain UFO researcher interviewed a lady that was in the military in Japan in the Army, and the boss asked her to clean out the files. And at the back of one file cabinet was something very close to what we now call the Eisenhower briefing document. Okay.
Right.
So, you know, there are all little hints in that. Now, if you look at the Timothy Cooper documents, there are hundreds of pages of this stuff. MJ12 is all over the place. Now, I'm not saying they're authentic or that they're real, but somebody somewhere, for some reason, was really pushing this MJ12 meme. And it may have been occurring, you know, way before 1980. Now, the CIA does use certain letter combinations. You know, they had a ZR rifle and MK Ultra. And so maybe there was an MJ something, you know, and it's like a decision tree. Either MJ12 existed or it didn't exist. If it existed, it either had something to do with UFOs or it didn't have anything to do with it, UFOs. Okay. You've got to go down that decision tree, but I'm unable to confirm, you know, what the case is.
It's an incredible deception, though, regardless of whether it did or it didn't, Tom. When you consider what you've just said, it's planted all over the place. The little seeds have been planted, so it's been laid there to germinate. For what reason? To what end, though? Do you know what I mean? It is fascinating, and so after MJ12. You know, unless you're going to say, well, no, there won't be an after because I'm just going to continue researching. What other documents, what other archives or cases or things of special interest would sort of get you researching? There must be other things that you're wanting to look into.
Yeah, well, it's my part of my thesis is that the MJ12 controversy is still going on today, to this day. Just a couple of years ago, there was a document that came out that I call the ultra top secret document. A person by the name of Heather Wade put it out, and
Heather Wade from Midnight in the Desert.
That was, yeah. It's pretty obviously not authentic, but it's an apparent MJ12 style document. There's another person by the name of Charles McNeil. He's actually in jail, but he claims that he was recruited by he was groomed by AFOSI when he was a teenager and shown all this stuff, which he's actually submitted a lot of this stuff on Twitter. So this kind of thing is still going on. Yeah. And that's interesting. Listen, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go. I'm out of time. I really appreciate you having me on.
Listen, Tom, it's been, well, look at my phone's just going again. I'd like to blame you for the phone, but it's mine. So okay then, Tom, we shall see you later. And thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And yeah. And we shall catch you later. Thank you very much. And
yeah, and I want to thank you for having me, and I hope maybe we can do this again sometime. Okay,
hope so.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hello, guys. We've still got 30 minutes. We could close it down now if you want. I don't know if there's any questions for me. I'm not certain. It looks like see another Outer Limits question, and let's just run through these. And thank you, Tom. He's gone, but sorry about the internet connection, but we couldn't really do a lot about that. And see how Laura's in. Tracy Welburn, Awake, Stuart Farrington. We've got Lee doing the moderating Paranormal Visitors. Let's have a look. I can't see any more questions. How about for half an hour? We'll try and get through this. I'll do a little... Not a story. It's a case that I've been told that if my phone don't go off again, it's a missing time experience. So shall we do this one? And we'll see how we get along. If the internet freezes, turn me off. And don't forget, press like and subscribe if you haven't already done it. And let's just go. Missing time experience. And we'll get straight into it. I've called it the Strange Walk Home. And I've got a few notes here. These are these bits of paper that I put aside just in case somebody doesn't turn up. And I thought, well, I can do this. We've got half an hour to spare, or 15 minutes. So we're going back to 2001, and we'll call this lady Wendy. I've changed her name. And she left her friend's home to walk home. It was about 11:30 at night, and she told me, and we've spoken, that she remembered the time precisely because she looked at her watch. It says a clock, but she looked at her watch in a friend's house before leaving. It says watch and clock there, so that's great, isn't it? She didn't realize it was so late, and she immediately put a coat on to leave as a wave of fear ran through her. So let's not confuse. Let's just get this screen a bit bigger now. Let's not confuse this with the UFO or anything at the moment. There's a good reason. She was worried that if she didn't get back right away before midnight, there'd be hell to pay. Okay. A friend decided to walk halfway home with her, something that they both did, depending on whose house it was. Her husband was a control freak. That's the reason she had to get home. And she was frightened, basically. She just knew she had to get home. And she walked halfway. So Wendy and her friend, they didn't live that far away. It were only a 10 to 15 minute walk between their houses. And the ladies left the house, cutting through a few streets until they got to what they called the valley. I'm not going to say where this location is. I want to just keep this lady's identity pretty tight anyway. Named so because there was a dip in the land and locals said it was easier to walk around it than go through it. Right. As they reached the valley area, Wendy became aware of a pressure in her ears. So here we go. When it starts to get a bit weird, doesn't it? After a minute or two, she realized that she couldn't hear the traffic, so we dropped into the lower silence. How many times does this happen in these states of eye strangeness? And there was a busy road at the end of the valley. Obviously, at that time of night, it might have been busy, but there was still a road. She couldn't hear nothing. Turn a page. It's like Jack and Ori, this, isn't it? Right. In fact, she couldn't hear anything apart from her friend's voice, and they both commented how strange it was, and there was a slight echo in the voices. And she could only describe it as being in some kind of vacuum. And I've not bent these words, people, to suit my narrative. I've kept it as close to this lady's report as possible. She actually remembered putting her fingers in her ears and wiggling them about, thinking that, there must be something wrong with her ears. Something's wrong here. And as she looked ahead, she saw what she can only describe as a very bright light. Wendy told me that it was hard to describe the light. I mean, that's strange, don't you think? People talk about seeing all sorts of things, UFOs. I can't really describe it. It's just a light. Why can't you describe it? And I'm not having a go at anybody here. I'm as guilty myself. I think we all are. It was as if someone had a massive torch that was shining down out of the sky. That's how she could describe it, or the best she could describe it. She told me that they could visibly see the line that it made on the ground. So we're looking at, imagine a laser light, I would imagine, but a lot wider. And the rooftops as it inched towards them. So within seconds of her noticing the light, a friend stopped talking and they both stopped walking. So they both sort of ultra aware of what's happening, even though they've dropped into this lower silence. And if you have any questions for this, we might not get to them, but if you have, just let me know. She grabbed a friend's arm and said, "What's that?" She maybe swore, I don't know, but said, "What's that?" They both looked up into the sky, but could only see clouds. They couldn't see anything shining through the clouds apart from this light beaming down. No bright lights, nothing, only the bright bar of light that slowly was inching towards them. A friend suddenly let out a frightened scream, and they both turned and started running back towards a friend's house. So obviously they're closer to where she's just been than their home. Back the way they came, trying to get away as fast as they could from the light. Incredibly, the next thing that they knew, they were on the other side of the valley. So they've gone to, right, okay, they were on the other side of the valley, only a few minutes from Wendy's house, where they were going, or where they intended to go. Any of that make sense? I hope it does. It does to me, but I've read it a few times and I know where I'm going with it, which was impossible. They've ran back to where they've been, but they've ended up where they were going. Stay with it. Wendy says that she knew the direction she was running and had no idea how she got back to her own house when she was running in opposite direction. As she ran, she also remembered that she was too afraid to look back over her shoulder, absolutely terrified, and a friend echoed the same sentiments. For some reason, she thought that if she could see something, for some reason, she thought that she would see something terrifying behind them, even though she's seen nothing and we're just looking at a light. How can a light be terrifying? Yeah, I don't know. We shall see. Wendy says that her and a friend practically fell through the front door, and she come face to face with her husband, who had a face like thunder, and he instantly demanded to know where she'd been. That's a bit like me. I do that. Let's have a look. All Wendy could do was utter something out loud about a light. Something chased us. It was a light. She then said that she ran upstairs to look out of a bedroom window but could not see anything. All of this happened while a friend was sat on the chair in the living room, crying, sobbing uncontrollably. Wendy gazed through the bedroom window up into the sky but couldn't tell if the light was there or not. She couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. Unfortunately, her husband followed her upstairs, still demanding to know where she'd been. He then went on into another angry rant about how she could have made up a better story than that about being chased by a light as an excuse for being back so late. He was raging and saying that he had to be up for work and that she was a lying, selfish person. It's a polite way of putting it. Wendy says he wasn't making much sense at all. Not until she glanced at the clock and realized it was 12:50 a.m. The whole journey from a friend's house should have taken no more than 15 minutes. Neither of them could understand what had happened or what they had seen or experienced. How many people have sort of been in that situation? I don't mean this exact situation, but I think we all know of people that have sort of experienced things like that. Let's have a look. Let's just throw this in. Maybe she saw something. Let's have a look. We'll just put that up. Maybe she saw something in the light, Paul. Yeah, maybe she did, Mike. Or there's some terrifying influence from the light. I don't know, but I guess she'll never know unless any flashbacks come. I really don't know, mate. I'll just check we've not missed a question there. I see our Laura's in as well. Good to see you, Laura. And Kim King. Let's have a look here. TA, Lynn Murphy, crazy. And it's not crazy. It's Lee that's saying crazy. Right, okay. 15 minutes. Neither of them could understand what had happened or what they had seen and experienced. They were both frightened, very clammy and sweating, but could not understand why. At the time, she didn't see it as odd as they had run a short distance. So perhaps would have been sweating, so at the time they felt really sweating. I don't think they were thinking about the UFO abduction phenomena or anything like that. That weren't coming into the mind. They'd just seen an unusual light. It's only when you sit down and digest these things sometimes years after, that you start to realize something untoward may have happened. Right, because if they had even that distance wouldn't have been enough to build up a sweat or get them sort of really hot and bothered running across the valley. She added that it was truly just a short distance. Even though both of them remembered running back to her friend's house, nothing can explain how they arrived at the other side of the valley at Wendy's house. Which it can't, can it? But I mean, if we knew what were happening in these situations, we wouldn't be sat here, and I won't be reading this to you guys and sort of gauging what you think. I don't know what you think, to be honest with you, but it's a strange one, isn't it? At that point, Wendy was no more concerned by how her husband. At that point, Wendy was more concerned by how her husband was going to punish her than what had happened to them. So that's understandable, isn't it? In truth, she was more frightened of her husband than the fear and confusion of the short time slightly before entering the house. My friend was still crying a lot. She was terrified and kept asking what had happened. And she was right. Nothing made any sense. Who would play a trick like that on two women and cause them so much fear, is what she's thinking. How did they manage to get into Wendy's house? They had no idea between them how they could have happened. They talked for a good while trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. They went through every scenario. Had it been someone playing some sort of late night prank? And I think we all know, listening to what I've just read, that's probably just not possible. But I suppose all these scenarios go through your head if you've never had, until this point, an experience of true unexplained phenomena interact with you? If so, how did they get that powerful spotlight placed above them? How did it move across the ground without them being able to see where it came from? All good points, aren't they? Everything about what happened was confusing. How did the light become so big and in such a clear line? It crossed the roofs on the houses on to their left and in front of them. It also crossed the roads, but it didn't make any sense. If it had been a helicopter, why didn't they hear it? And why did all the sound around them suddenly disappear? Well, you know, a true telltale sign of some kind of interaction with the true unexplained phenomena is the lower silence, as a lot of people in chat and a lot of people listening to this afterwards will verify, I would think. So, right, and why wasn't the light shining through the clouds? So many questions. Wendy's friend said she also noticed the lack of sound, but only at the exact moment that she noticed the light coming towards them. They discussed everything over and over, and her friend kept saying that she knew something bad happened and that she was very frightened. She just couldn't remember what had happened. Perhaps that's a good thing. Wendy phoned a taxi for a friend around 2 a.m. in the morning because she was too terrified to walk back home. We're nearly there. As the weeks passed, Wendy didn't see much of a friend. And when she did, she outright refused to talk about anything that happened on that night. Absolute telltale signs of interaction with the unexplained. You know, I was listening to an interview that I did here with Jimmy, who was in Broxer Forest when we made Wolflands, and he came and visited me. And I know Steve will probably listen to this, but he said after they'd seen what they'd seen in the forest, him and Jim didn't talk to each other for a while because it was just too difficult to go through the trauma of what they'd seen and experienced. And those two shared that experience, and it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So a friend outrightly. And when she did, her friend outright refused to talk about anything that happened that night. From that night, she began to totally distance herself from Wendy. Wendy thinks that seeing her reminded her of what happened. You know, it's there, isn't it? It's telltale signs. Perhaps her friend remembered more. That's what I think anyway. So I've just kind of added that line. And that it had frightened her so much that all she wanted to do was forget. So once again, you know, we all know, don't we, that we've said it many times, that there's people out there who've been affected and seen and experienced far more than any of you guys, than I have, than anybody's ever experienced, and they just sat in silence and probably don't even want to watch things like this because it just revives bad memories. Wendy admitted that the break in their friendship didn't help because all she wanted to do was talk about what happened. And you know, 2004, and this weren't traumatic, myself and Shorty, Chris Short, were travelling home from York, and we got to Sledmere and we saw a huge object over some trees. Didn't make a sound, it was pulsing. We could feel the waves of energy coming from it, and we were stood outside the van looking at it. And for a couple of days we talked about it and told everybody at work about it. And over the next weeks and months that followed, he won't talk about it. And if you asked him now, he'd say, well, we did see something. It's strange how it affects people. Right, let's have a look. Excuse me. Wendy admitted that the break in their friendship didn't help because all she wanted to do was talk about it. Sorry for breaking in here, people. Because she simply couldn't understand or get her head around the whole situation. She told me that after this experience, her friend turned to religion within weeks of that night, adding that she never had an interest in religion before. She got christened into the Catholic Church, and over a period of time, they lost touch with each other and life moved on. Wendy no longer sees her friend or knows where she is. Over time, Wendy forgot about this weird experience in her life, and her life was busy. Wendy was busy. She had more important things to do with her life to fret over something that she couldn't understand. Not long after the incident, Wendy moved out of the area, divorced her husband, got a new job, and told me this story. So I hope that were a little bit of interest and filled a few blanks in between Tom Whitmore and the live stream. And let's just have a quick look, people. If there's any questions, let's have a look here. Steve Collins sounds like classic missing time abduction, and by the way, he needs. Okay, Steve. Yeah, I think you're probably right there, my friend, and more power to you for thinking that. So, and been enjoying it, Dada. Laura says, Kim King, Alison, Jem, Laura, Lee. Let's have a look who's in here. I think we've done with questions, people, and we'll be back Sunday. And Lee Solway contacted me the other day and said he'd got something else he wanted to share with me. So there's a chance we might be speaking to Lee. I need to speak to him tomorrow. I've not had. I feel like that newsreader. I want to see that. I want to do that again. I haven't had a chance today, but I will do. So all being well, guys, we'll catch you Sunday. See, Linny's there. Switch the lights off. Switched his lights off. I don't know what he means by that, Linny, but no doubt he'll tell me tomorrow. They were all picking on me yesterday on Cliff Tops, by the way. I didn't like that. But all right, Stargazer says, "Where's the map gone?" It's still around somewhere, Stargazer. I still have it, and we'll probably reintroduce it at some point. So we'll be back Sunday, and until then, we'll catch you guys later. Thanks for support, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Oh, wow.
Saw it twice, so I was like, oh my god.
That was just weird.
I always used to see a light coming up,
Yeah.
like a headlight, but there was nobody there.
Oh, it's just disappeared.